up, everybody? Welcome into the How Not to Be a Youth Pastor podcast, where your favorite two youth pastors, Kyle and Derek, talk every week how not to be a youth pastor, because we've learned a lot of different ways how not to be a youth pastor.
You say how not to look like a youth pastor?
We have also learned a lot of ways how not to look like a youth pastor. However, I will say because every youth pastor ever knows the line from the Marvel movie. I believe it was the third Spider-Man movie, where all three Spider-Men are getting together. You know what I'm talking about?
No, because I haven't seen it.
You haven't seen it?
No, I
How?
know.
Oh, my goodness.
It's a massive problem, honestly.
Okay, so most youth pastors know the line. The new Spider-Man comes out. It's the No Way Home, or whatever one it was. Yeah, it was like Homecoming, Far From Home, and then No Way Home. I was like, you guys need to be more original with your titles. But in No Way Home, and if you haven't seen it by now, we're just going to spoil it for you because it's been multiple years, I think, that it's been out. But in the movie, and it was the coolest thing I've ever seen them do in this regard. There's obviously been more than one actor to play Spider-Man. You had the original Tobey Maguire, you had Andrew Garfield, and now you have Tom Holland. And so what they did was they brought the multiverse into this movie and used it to explain the fact that multiple actors have played Spider-Man, and then brought Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield into the movie.
Legends.
Along with Tom Holland. It was very, very well done. It was the coolest way I've ever seen any franchise explain having multiple actors for something. But it's Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man that they're talking about getting ready to here's the plan, here's how we're gonna attack the bad guys, whatever. And Tobey Maguire's just wearing his this normal looking outfit, sweatshirt and jeans kind of thing. I think he's got a jean jacket on over the top. And one of the other one is what are you gonna where's your suit? What are you gonna do? Just go fight crime dressed as a cool youth pastor? And I literally died laughing in the theater. I was the only one laughing, me and my wife, and but it was the greatest thing I've ever.
It's a little too spot on.
It there is one look, and I already owned everything he was wearing.
Yep.
And so the next Wednesday, I wore that complete outfit, and I was like, This is the cool youth pastor vibe. I
am also now aware that now that we have a wonderful video element to our podcast, huge shout out to Tucker for undertaking this thing for us. They now get to see, and they should know this by now, but they're going to see us having 2 episodes in the same attire.
That is true. I didn't think of that. They gotta do a wardrobe change or something.
I think it is critical that we make everyone understand that we do shower, we do have personal hygiene. We also just are very busy, and so we try to be efficient as much as we possibly can.
That's true. We get together, record 2 episodes at a time.
Yeah, which they already kind of knew. Huh. We kind of alluded to that anyway, but it doesn't take away from the magic, there still is some pizzazz to this thing.
I thought about I'll just quick whip my sweatshirt off. I got a shirt underneath. It'll look like I changed.
Well,
but
I
then
just spoiled it now for everybody.
Well, yeah, that's true. But I was thinking, anybody who's ever worked at a church knows this to be true. Our church is freezing all the time. And so I don't want to take the sweatshirt off because then I will be very, very cold.
Is it always cold in the summer too?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's nice.
Yep.
You get that for 2 months out of the year.
It's too cold.
What?
Sometimes I keep a sweatshirt in my office even during the summer.
Oh, weird.
Yeah.
I have the opposite problem. I sweat buckets in my office in the summer. Holy buckets. We have seriously a gift of getting we haven't even started our quick question of the day yet.
Bring it on.
All right. Kyle, have you ever played, or did you ever play laser tag as a kid?
Listen, laser tag's the best.
Yep, sure is.
We had I think there were a couple places in Rochester growing up that we could play laser tag. But my favorite was there were a couple times where we got to play laser tag in the church sanctuary for a youth game.
Nice.
Oh man. It was that was the best. We did Nerfs once, and they didn't let us do that again because we didn't pick up all the bullets well enough. So they were like all lying around.
That sounds
later.
like exactly on par.
Yeah, but then the lasers is just like the guns in the vest. So it was a blast. We could like darken the whole place and just shoot each other.
I was thinking about this last night because you're probably wondering how in the world does this have anything to do with what you guys are going to talk about. It does.
Actually, I kind of see where this might be going.
Where I grew up, St. Cloud, Minnesota, there was this place called the Skating Place. Huge like skate floor, like where you can put on roller skates, rollerblades, skate around. But then in the back, outside of the arcade, they had this laser tag room, and with a nasty carpet in it. Like, I don't know, now with technology, with how far it's come since we were wee little lads, laser tag, you can kind of like relatively make it lightweight. Not back then. Yeah. Back then we had like 20-pound vests on with wires running everywhere. The guns were like seriously like 5 pounds, I'm convinced.
Clipped to the vest.
Correct. So you had no mobility. Yep. And then you'd walk into, the staging room where they had all the vests hanging up, and they had like black lights in there, and your teeth were like, pulsingly white. And like they do like the whole rules thing, like no running in here and do all this different stuff.
Don't climb on stuff you're not supposed to climb on.
Yep. But then like when they would send you off into each of your respective teams, you're like, oh yeah. Like,
it's about to get serious.
Let's get this done. And then, you're feeling like just an absolute tank, right? Like you're feeling like Rambo before you go into this thing. You're ready to just like absolutely slay everybody. And so then they blast the music super, super loud with this like techno EDM kind of music. And then they open the doors, and there is like a wave of like fog, like the cheap stuff where it's like you can taste it and it's palpable. and you got like lasers jetting everywhere and strobes, and like if you're on the verge of epilepsy at all, like you're having a rough time because it's absolute crazy in there, and it's a blast. Like I look back on those times and I was like, laser tag was
laser
legit.
Tag's where it's at.
Then you jump out of there and eat some really cheap nasty pizza, spend a lot of money on games, skate around on the floor. That made for a wonderful birthday party.
Yeah, is this place still open? Yeah, do a youth event up there.
There might be some extracurricular activities that go down at that same place now.
Yeah, that's no good.
Some external products that get sold at this place. So, but we should go. Maybe we'll do a remote episode from the skating place in St. Cloud.
While we are like shooting 12-year-olds in laser tag.
Yeah, episode 100, special remote location, skating place, St. Cloud, Minnesota.
You could get, I don't know how the audio would work, but you could get like a couple of our students to follow us around in the place with cameras.
On gimbals, so it's nice and smooth.
Yeah. Well, I know for sure that is not in the budget, but we'll see. We'll see what we can pull together.
That's like another 29 episodes from now. We might get, now that we've got some video and an Instagram page, we might
start monetizing on YouTube. Man, this is where it's at. I like it. We'll see what we can do. All right. We are talking today about atmosphere in youth ministry, because what better segue than going from the atmosphere of the laser tag room to the atmosphere of your youth ministry, especially because for some people, it's not that big of a difference.
I was just going to say, for some youth ministries, it might be the exact same thing. And so that's what we're going to talk about when we talk about like atmosphere. When you think about your Wednesday night, obviously you can think about the preaching and the connect groups or small groups, whatever you call them, worship time. But depending on the church you will walk in, you will see a culmination of some of these things. You're probably going to see some form of specialized lights, whether they are colorful, whether they are like spotlights onto the stage. You'll see some kind of specialized lights that are probably more than just a light switch on and off like you have in your living room in your house. You're undoubtedly going to have some form of a sound system that probably can take levels to a very, very loud level. You're probably going to see some form of graphics or slides on the screen, whether that is a video wall, whether that is a projector.
Can we give a shout out and give Tucker some material? to the transparent slides.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the overhead projector where you have to take the transparencies and put them on and then whip them off
slide
and then
it off and put the new one on there.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
shoot, that one's backwards. Got to flip it around.
I always hated in school when the teachers would use those and they'd write things backwards and you're like, what? And then everyone's giving them the deer in the headlights. Like, oh, crap. And they had to flip it over.
Yep.
Such a good time.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever actually seen those used outside of a math class.
No.
Like, I never was blessed enough to go to a church that was using them for slides.
I didn't get saved fast enough. I didn't get saved until I was 13.
That's the problem.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. It was it's a bummer, but I've heard amazing things. And if we're really talking about all of this, I think it's also critical that we are going to talk about haze. All right? Whether you call them smoke machines, fog machines, haze, whatever you call it, we're going to talk about all these different things. So there's a few different branches to this, but it kind of falls under this umbrella of like setting the atmosphere in a youth ministry. And even as we say things like special lights, haze, sound systems, you probably have certain feelings on either side of this spectrum. Some people are probably going like, oh gosh, I hate when churches use haze and I hate when they do that because it's whatever. And then you have other guys who are like, oh, we blast the sucker. You know, we have haze going the whole time, and it creates.
If kids aren't choking, it's not effective.
Right? Yeah. You know, and like it sounds extreme, but I guarantee you, we have listeners right now who fall on both sides of that spectrum.
Yep.
And so we're gonna talk about all of it, and how it can fit into your specific context. And so, I think it's only appropriate to start with, you know, Kyle and I kind of stand on this hill of. Our why really dictates our what a lot of the times for you and I both. Like everything we do always has a why behind it, at least for the most part. And so I think when it comes to the philosophy of setting the atmosphere in your youth ministry, it's super important to ask yourself why or why not you want to incorporate these elements into your service. Because that question alone is going to make some decisions very easy or very difficult for you. And it's also going to impact how much money you spend on certain things. This has to be a fundamental question because I think a lot of pastors, especially youth pastors, think that when you arrive as a church is when you have all of these toys, right? Like when you have the fancy lights, when you have the booming sound system, when you have the haze and you can get some sweet pictures at youth and you can put them on your Instagram, you're like, oh yes, we've arrived here, as if like that is the litmus test for a youth ministry. Like when you get there, then you've arrived as a church. And that's just is straight up not true. Another part of that is pastors, especially youth pastors, because you want to get there, you tend to spend an excessive amount of money on things hoping to achieve something that elements alone can't fix. Like, you know, I'm going to drop 10 grand on these two movers so that we can have, you know, lights that pan out into the crowd and then come back. And I'm going to spend 10 grand on it. Meanwhile, you have kids who aren't going to your spring retreat because they don't have money for it. And instead of giving scholarships to them, you just spent 10 grand on two movers. You know, we're going to talk about, you know, why those things can impact. But ultimately, I want to just set the stage here, and I want you, Kyle, to give your perspective here. But like, I think it's critical for us to understand and ask this question: why do I want this for my youth ministry? Why do I want haze? Why do I not want haze? Why do I want the good lights? Why do I not want the lights? Why do you want these things? Because I think when we ask ourselves that question in its entirety, it's going to reveal a lot of where our heart's at with these kind of things.
Yeah, I think that, you know, there's a lot of factors that go into this. Maybe the most important one is understanding kind of who your students are and what your mission and vision are as a youth ministry. You know, for us, for our youth ministry, you know, we have a haze machine we don't use. We have lights that do move, and we rarely have them move. Because our goal is not to create that kind of environment. Our goal is almost to specifically avoid creating that kind of an environment, because what we and maybe this is the season that we're in, but I really feel like it's just a reflection of who we are as a ministry. Like that's not something that we want to focus on. Now, if we kind of give a shout out back to the episode we did where we were talking about like can a youth ministry be too big? That's where like there's a youth ministry and a church in general in our area where their goal is to reach people that are not going to church at all. And very commonly, I will see families and students come to our church after having spent 2 or 3 years at this other church. They got saved at this church, but now they want to go something a little bit deeper, something where they can build deeper relationships with people. And so they come and check out our church. And because we're smaller as a church, and so we can be a little bit more intentional. It's very, very difficult for a very large church to be intentional about building those small relationships. It's a little bit easier for us. This other church, if you go to their Sunday morning, or you go to their youth service on Wednesday night, they have all of this and some. They got plenty of haze, they got plenty of lasers, plenty of moving lights, but their goal is to make somebody feel comfortable. Like, yeah, I go to concerts all the time. This feels a little bit more natural for me. When you take all of that stuff out and just pursue the presence of God, that can be a little bit intimidating for somebody who's new. And I think there are really good ways, and we do this, we have to do this. There are really good ways to help with that and to teach on that. But all of that to say, I think that the purpose of your youth ministry and the vision is important. If you're not like be okay, just we don't go for the flash. We aren't focused on that because we want to focus on something else. And if have a niche as a ministry, be comfortable with that, be secure in that, and let another ministry have a different niche and go in a different direction.
I love that so much because that really is what it boils down to. These things aren't inherently good or bad. Any one of these elements is not going to, in and of themselves, they are not going to make or break your ministry. But they can make or break it depending on your context. I love that because, in your context, that would be a deterrent for you. But that doesn't mean it's bad. You're not sitting there and going I'm just going to badmouth this church down the road because they use haze and I think it's so stupid.
We can get into the things themselves, haze, movers, gobos, all these different things. I could get really deep into the technological side of these things. But all these things themselves inherently are not bad.
Right.
But there are bad ways to use
absolutely.
Every single one.
Yeah.
From a philosophical side, like Derek was saying, if you are not giving scholarships so that you can buy $10,000 of lights, that might be a problem. That's a philosophical problem with this. A practical problem would be we got students that don't want to come in for worship because it's too loud.
Yep.
We got students that don't want to be there for worship because the smoke is too thick. Okay, this is a problem. Let's address it, find that sweet spot, and then move forward from there.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where we're going to move now is let's, once you have that philosophy down, let's talk about how each of, these elements can contribute to your youth ministry. Because again, it's one of those things, I think it's such a critical question to ask yourself where you stand on it right now and what you think in your context right now is good. Because I do believe that we're going to talk about the good first. I do believe all the things that we've just mentioned can enhance your youth ministry. It's not that just the elements themselves make it better, but it goes into this episode title, it helps create an atmosphere, right? Yeah. When you walk into Olive Garden and have a nice dinner with your spouse, with your friend, whatever, there's a reason when you walk into Olive Garden, they're not blasting screamo music.
Yeah.
Because that doesn't make you want to enjoy a nice Italian dinner, right?
That's not the vibe.
It's not for me, right?
No.
But you will have some slow, smooth dinner style music playing at Olive Garden. It's going to be a comfortable temperature in there. The lighting is warm and a little bit down. Why? It creates an atmosphere. If you walked into Olive Garden expecting a romantic dinner, even if the food was amazing and it was the most 5-star level Italian food, but they had bright neon lights in there with screamo music, you're not getting couples going out there on their anniversary.
Yep.
Because the atmosphere sucks. You know, if your atmosphere in your youth ministry is not great, it's not that they can't connect with God, it's just that it's harder for them to do that. There's a reason that kids love going to things like youth convention and camp. It's not because inherently the speakers are that much better at what they do. It's not that, you know, all of a sudden like there's this massive shift. It's that there's a different atmosphere when they're surrounded by hundreds of other fellow peers and there are different elements that they don't see on a Wednesday night. It creates an atmosphere for them to connect with God.
Yeah. Can I, because we've got like this list you have in our show doc, haze, light, sound, graphics, background music. Can we go through individually on those and kind of talk about, because Derek is the one that kind of championed the outline for this episode and the idea for it, and I love the timing of it because we just did a training with the students that are in our tech booth. Not on, I didn't train at all on like, hey, here's how to mix on the soundboard. Like we can do that another time. The purpose of this training was like, you guys are the stewards of the atmosphere in this room. And, everybody knows that being on the tech team is like being a referee. If no one knows you're there, that means you're doing your job well. If nobody notices you, like if you can, there are baseball referees that people know by name because they're so bad at their job. Baseball umpires, my bad. But other sports, it's the same thing. And if nobody notices you're there, if no one really notices a lot of these things, unless they're pointed out, that's usually a win.
A great thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's run through like what each of these things are. Is kind of,
yeah. So
some
like,
of them are self-explanatory.
If we start with like the sound system.
Okay.
I don't know the math, and actually the math is going to be different depending on the room that you're in, but you could probably even Google like, hey, here's the dimensions of my room. What should the decibels be at? Get a decibel reader that you can have in your sound system. And like if you have a worship team, especially during rehearsal, have your sound person, just check the decibel level in the room to make sure that it's not obnoxiously loud. I think that, from a sound perspective, there's not that's really the only thing that I can think of. Like there's a lot of intricacies to running sound. But one of the biggest no-nos is just like, hey, it does not need to be as loud as a jet engine on the runway in here.
Well, it also creates some objectivity amongst different sound people because every sound person has a different ear and they mix it differently, but they also have different volumes. Myself, who has been hunting since I was 5 years old and had shotguns going next to my ear for the last how many years, my hearing is not as good as say someone else's,
Yeah.
So I might think it's a good level in here, whereas someone who has better hearing might be going, gosh, So I think that decibel meter is super, super helpful.
And I want to kind of lump background music into this, not from the perspective of like the keys at the end of the sermon, but like we have pre-service music that's playing, in the room beforehand. Last night we started our night off. We're recording this on a Thursday. The previous Wednesday night for our youth ministry, we started off with a game. And so we had some music playing underneath that. Typically at the end of our nights, we break out into our connect groups and we have just some soft worship music playing under that. All of that kind of goes with like, if you've got a student or a volunteer running your soundboard, stewarding the atmosphere and not having dead spots in the music in the atmosphere is a very underrated part of all of this.
It's something it's probably been the thing I've talked to our media team the most about is at the end of my sermons on Sunday mornings, there's almost always just a little bit of that dead space between when I send everybody out and then bringing up like the music to end. So then it's like, I say goodbye to everybody from the stage, and then there's like this 10-second window of just silence when everyone grabs their coats, and like it just creates this, instead of people walking out feeling like encouraged and optimistic, and that was cool. It's now like it
feels like you're leaving a funeral.
Yeah, it does. And like I think it kind of goes back to, does that negate everything we just talked about? Well, no, but if that transition, that small thing were to just be a little bit more polished, it would change how people walked out of,
sure.
And so that's kind of, this could be summed up going back philosophically, and then I'll get back to practical again. These are small things that can just take your service from an 8 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10, or from a 6 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10, either which direction. And so it's just important to do that. So you have your background music and your sound system. That's a soundboard. That's your speakers. For both of those things, some people will have an analog board, which means they have the individual knobs you can turn. Other people will have a digital board. There are different things we could go into that, but realistically, it can produce the same results. We don't have to get into that too crazy right now. Let's chat lights quick.
Yeah.
You mentioned a word that I want you to dive into. Gobos.
Gobos. Heck yeah. So I want to start with if we're talking about lighting, the most important lighting is the front lighting. These are they'll commonly be referred to as wash lights. These are the lights that they are mounted, pointed at the stage. They're hitting you as the speaker on the front side of you. They illuminate you on stage. Before you add any other lighting, this is the lighting that you need to get right. These lights should not be the ones that move. Like, these are lights, you set them, they point at a specific spot on the stage, and you don't touch them. They're either on or they're off. The really fancy ones can change color. And the even fancier ones can change color without, like, you seeing the rotation of the circle of, like, the white to the green.
Yep.
Because that's just hilarious, and I love that. But that front lighting is important. Like, that's what you got to get right first. The next kind of lighting that you got to get is, I'd put these two into the same category of backlighting and uplighting. Backlighting is mounted above you from behind, coming back down at you. Typically, this is a little bit of a different color. It could be kind of a whitish. It could also, like, blue is a pretty common color for it. It gives you depth on stage, whether it's the worship team or the speaker. It's not, this is probably the third most important. The second most important would be the uplighting. And really all that means is, like, lighting behind the stage, typically pointed either straight up or back out at the audience.
Yep.
That gives a little bit of depth to the stage as a whole. And kind of creates some atmosphere. Yes, typically that's where most of the color will come from. And then your backlighting, can kind of fill in a little bit of color. That provides depth to you as the speaker. The uplighting provides depth to the stage as a whole. And so those two can be cool, but it's so much more important to get the front lighting right before you start to play around with those. Then, as Derek said, we can get to, like, the gobos. Movers are just colored lights that move. They have 360-degree moving abilities. They can go all over. You can pattern them, program them to do whatever you want. Gobos is when you start to get into lights that, like, create shapes.
Yep.
And so you are casting a light that creates a specific shape onto a wall, onto the stage, wherever it is. I would, they are so low of a priority for me, but we don't have any in our youth room. They can also gobos can be used really well for spotlights. So I'll say that too. That's another useful thing for them, but I've seen gobos used, I don't know about you, but in a number of different ways. I've seen them used where they're pointed at the stage from like kind of from the same perspective as the front lights. I've seen them used where they are on stage pointing up back at the ceiling above the audience, casting light there. Or as backlights coming down, like shadows behind people. I've seen it used almost everywhere.
Yeah. And they get expensive for that very reason.
Yeah. It actually, like the front ones, I don't know what gobos go for right now. The front ones are probably like good ones are $7,000 to $10,000 a piece. Which is so much money. Yeah,
it is. And that's, we're going to get into how at the end of the episode, because I think there's a lot of tips and tricks that when it comes to all these things. But I loved what you said, Kyle, about like that wash on you. That's, nobody wants to spend money on that. Because like those are not the flashy, cool lights that people notice. But it does make a big difference from a spectator when you are lit up as the speaker and that kind of thing. The last two I want to tackle here are different, but the one are the graphics in the slides. A lot, your standard church typically now has a projector for this. Yeah. That projector is casting on a screen or multiple screens that is run from the Pro Presenter program or whatever program you use to project slides. That is the most common.
You could use even something like PowerPoint,
right?
But a Pro Presenter is by far the most popular program to be running.
It's quick, it's responsive. You can do a lot of different things like lower thirds for a stream. We seriously should just do a Pro Presenter episode. That could be a fun
because, and this is I think we might have talked about it. We should do another What College Didn't Teach Me episode.
But I actually was taught this.
But I think we talked about this. Like I did not. A lot of youth pastors get crossed over. It's youth/tech, youth/worship, youth/kids, and so talking about like, hey, if you are in charge of like the tech at your church, let's talk about some of those things. So that'd be a fun episode to do in the future. I agree.
Yeah. But I think where you start to see some variation, and this is, this would fall under the category of some of these bigger churches we talked about earlier, but some will have an LED screen. Yeah. So it's one big screen that's just a bunch of different individual LED panels, and oh boy, do those get expensive really fast. We're talking hundreds of thousands for some good ones and some big ones. That church we were referencing, I know with a sheer amount of confidence from someone who works there, we're talking somewhere between $250 to $1 million for that one LED screen. And again, is that wrong? I'm not saying it is, but it's out there. Like, there are some different elements to project that.
I'll throw out here, because it can be pretty easy to dunk on the big church that spends $250,000 on an LED screen. The church that I grew up going to, we did not have an LED screen, but this was also 2009. But they built a new building in 2005 and moved into it. Beautiful giant building. Sanctuary sat, I think, 12 or 1,300, and they specifically built the sanctuary with just about every bell and whistle from a tech standpoint that you could possibly imagine. Like, their sound booth was huge and had everything. We had like 2 soundboards. They had all the speakers you can imagine, all the screens you needed. And one of the reasons they did that was so that, because Rochester, where I grew up, is about an hour and a half from Minneapolis and St. Paul, huge metro area in Minnesota. And so they would get an artist like, Michael W. Smith, 10th Avenue North, big Christian artists would come and do a concert in Minneapolis at a venue, and our church was set up so that these artists could swing down on Thursday. They're doing concerts Friday and Saturday night up in the cities. Thursday night or Sunday night, they could come down and do a concert at our church, and it wouldn't cost them a whole bunch because a lot of their stuff, a lot of the tech stuff was already taken care of. and they had an opportunity to host a whole bunch of different Christian artists and different things, and it was basically like an outreach event almost. Like this was one of the ways that they reached out to the community was by bringing different artists in to do concerts. And so I wanted to mention that as another example of like, hey, here's like some of the kingdom mindset that you can have with some of this, but also remembering that goes back to vision. Like this was the vision and the mission that this church had for this space, and they made it happen. Not every church is called to do that exact same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one more thing I want to mention, but I'm going to mention it here in this last section in just a little bit here. But the last thing I want to cover is haze. And here's
real quick, before we get off the graphics and slides thing, I want to give youth pastors permission. A black background with white text is all you need. If again, like going back to like, if it's not your thing to be super like complicated with this, have a black background with white text. Same font every single week, same format every single week. Like, be simple with it. I have not used a moving background behind our worship slides in at least 3 years. It doesn't have to be super complicated if you don't want it to be. Like, so I just like give permission to youth pastors to be simple.
For sure. And that goes with all of these things.
It does.
If you want to do it and you want to tackle it, go ahead. If you don't, let this be something you go, so far behind the game, and now I'm sitting our youth ministry back. Like, no, these are. I
haven't swapped out our moving backgrounds in so long. I need to do that, but I have so much other work I need to do.
The line I have in here, these are enhancements, not substitutes.
Yeah, that's good.
These are things that can enhance if you desire to, but if
you do it well.
Yeah, and if they become a substitute where you're now substituting your time by making these cool graphics in place of doing other more important things, it's not worth your time. Last thing, just super practically, is the haze. This is, I don't care what you call it, fog, smoke, haze, whatever you want to call it.
There is actually a difference
between.
There's three major types. Like we'll call it all haze for practical sense, but there's three. My understanding is there's three major types.
Yes.
Type number one is. I think they call it floor haze or floor fog or something like that. But like if you watch Dancing with the Stars, like this is a lot of times what you'll see where it looks like it settles, it doesn't get more than like a foot off the ground, maybe 1.5 feet. And it just kind of settles there. It looks like they're walking on clouds during Dancing with the Stars. That's the effect they're going for. And so they're using a very dense haze on purpose. A fog machine is something where it's more evenly dispersed around the room, but it's a little bit thicker. A haze machine and a fog machine are different. Haze machine would be what I would describe as probably the goal for most churches, where a haze machine is going to allow the light beams to bounce off of this haze, and that's where you get the effect of you can see the beam of the light, but it doesn't hinder your ability to like see without your eyes watering.
Well, and that's what I was going to say is the actual juice that goes into these machines is not created equal.
Yes, that's accurate.
You can get the cheap stuff, and you're going to taste it. Yeah. You're going to see it.
There's even heavy. Like with the haze, I believe there's oil-based hazes and water-based hazes. Correct. Yep. And even from a practical standpoint, like ask your church's janitor if the oil-based haze is something that you want to use. Like it settles. Yeah. And it stains and it seeps into whatever else is in the room. Yep. And so I would highly recommend the water haze for that reason. The other thing that I think not a lot of youth pastors take into consideration would be, if your haze is too thick, do you want to know who's not going to like it? Is the vocalists on your worship team.
That's correct.
Which is a underrated factor that I think is important. Like, especially have you ever seen a worship team where like the haze machine is clearly right next to one of the band members? I always feel so bad for them.
They're wearing goggles up on Sunday morning.
Yeah. They got like a scuba mask or like an N95 mask going on. Oh, that would not be good.
Yeah, no, and So taking all that, because you hit on some amazing points here. I'm going to sum up this because we talked about a lot of this. These things contribute to an experience like this. These kind of things can just make that atmosphere feel better, and people will attach certain memories to certain things. Like I remember, like there are certain times when I was at camp and God really spoke to me. When I picture that moment, like I remember everything. I remember the stage set on stage. I remember, the kind of music that was playing like that. People attach way more things subconsciously to memories than we realize. So that there's kind of tangible things for people to grab onto there. It can help students stay focused and engaged. If your sound system sounds muffled and crackly, they're now distracted. You lost them,
Yeah.
So like having good things helps students to stay engaged. And I do believe there's something to be said about these kind of things just add some excitement and fresh looks to your stuff. I'm not saying that's what you need to focus on, but it is one of those things. Like we just recently redid some of our lights at church, and people are like, "It looks awesome in here." Like it just it was something fresh and new for them just to kind of grab a hold on. So there are some good things to that, but I think it's much more. Again, I love that analogy. When things, when these things, and when you notice they're bad, that's when you've now hit problems. When you don't notice them, great.
Yep.
Like that's awesome. But when you do notice them, it derails things a lot quicker than they enhance.
Even if you think about the science behind color, red is a color that elicits strong emotional responses. Red is often associated with anger. Having like there's science behind like if you have a red wall, a painted wall in your home, it's more likely to incite arguments between you and your spouse.
Interesting.
On the flip, another example would be yellow. Yellow is a color that often brings feelings of hunger. Okay? Now take those two together and ask yourself what colors McDonald's uses for their logo. A strong emotional response to hunger. Like that's what there's science behind this. Chick-fil-A, Arby's, how many different colors, how many different companies have red in their food logo? Yeah. Like the list goes on and on. And because there's a science behind it. And so one of the things that I think if there's intentionality behind it, like I could bring, a specific color into the design for this song. I like, as cliche as it is, we're playing oceans. Let's maybe get a little blue into the lights. As simple as it is, like no one will notice that, but on some level, their brain will connect those dots.
Right. Absolutely. And it's even one of those things where people do notice if all of a sudden, like you are, like if you get the wrong background and you try to switch it quick, all of a sudden now it's like, that's distracting. So
if the lights immediately switch versus a slow fade, you'll see, any of those things. And that's what I talked about with our tech team, when we met, was our goal is to not take people out of the presence of God. If the light glitches because we didn't check through everything beforehand and it shines right in somebody's eye, that might take them out of the presence of God.
I guarantee it will.
If we have this beautiful altar time and now we're going to go into our connect groups and you fade up the music and it's Cotton Eye Joe, that's going to take people out of that mood, out of that moment.
It ruins the atmosphere.
It does. And the whole goal of all these things is to be tasteful additions to the atmosphere, not to distract people and remove people from the atmosphere.
You could sum up this entire episode with one word. It's just transition. All of these things are just transitions. If your transitions suck, you notice it.
You mean that when I preach, I can't use the old PowerPoint slide transition where each individual letter goes like this, spiraling onto the screen? I can't do that when I preach.
I mean, I'd love to see it personally. Just gonna say that.
That'd be awesome. tell me that when you were a kid and you had to do some sort of PowerPoint presentation,
you sent everything.
Every single slide had a different transition effect.
With the sound effect.
With the sound effect. And it was the most obnoxious ones were the first ones in.
Yep. Or the word art. With the
yes.
Word art was legit.
Word art. Man, this is...
I know.
Taking us back to a really special time. Kids don't understand these days how easy graphic design is for them.
Yeah.
Like, we struggled through the early days. Like, how many logos did I create on Microsoft Paint?
Yep. Oh, they've got Canva, Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop. We had clip art, word art, Microsoft Paint, and
man.
it was you literally had the paintbrush with the mouse with the little ball in it that would like just hop over it every once in a while.
What company or who was it that had like the little paper clip that was that Microsoft like in Word?
Yeah.
The little paper clip that would like give you advice or something.
Yep.
Like, you look like you're trying to make an MLA citation. Let me help you with that.
Daryl was frustrated with the paper clip.
I remember that. Yes. Microsoft needs to bring that thing back.
They need to bring a lot of
disappointing.
Stuff back.
Oh, you know what? While we're on it, last thing. Preloaded onto Microsoft Windows computers was that pinball game.
Oh my gosh, that thing was amazing.
Go.
It was always small. That was the problem too. It never filled up the whole window.
That's true, but that was always.
You spend a lot of time. Same
I'm
with Solitaire.
sure there's a website out there somewhere that
definitely
has that game that you can go back and play. I loved playing that pinball game.
There's
that was
so
awesome.
many fun games on computer. I'm just gonna mention Backyard Sports and then leave it there.
Ooh, no, we're sticking to this because I believe it was. I don't remember. It had to have been Albert Pujols. Yep. I don't remember who it was, but like, did Albert Pujols play last year?
Yeah, it was last year.
It was his last year. Last year, with Albert Pujols' retirement. Officially, like all of the players, I don't know if it was baseball or every sport, but they're like all the real life players depicted in the game are now retired.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was like a passing of the baton.
Yep.
Like they're all retired now. And I was like, oh, that's so sad.
It's amazing though. I just want to go play that right now.
For
okay,
sure.
I'm bringing us back on track.
All right, there's a lot of good that comes with all these things, Derek.
Yeah.
But what is the bad?
We just hit the bad. We hit almost all the bad already. We've been hopping around like crazy.
We have been.
Here's we're gonna finish with how here in just a second. But
all
here's the sucky part about transitions. You can have amazing transitions and no one's gonna notice.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're doing what they're meant to do.
Yeah.
They're meant to transition from one thing to the next. So no one's going to, unless you're a nerd and you appreciate transitions, you're not going to be like, dude, that transition was awesome. Like no one's telling you that after service.
No. They're barely telling you the cool point from the sermon after service.
But what they are talking about is when like in the middle of oceans, all of a sudden the lights freaked out and went whoosh, and they're like,
yeah.
And then they're coming to talk to you like, what was up with the lights? Like that like,
yeah, that was weird.
They remember that, you know, so like that's the harsh reality. So like, that's why like when you do these things, you have to be in it for the right mindset because you're not going to get the reward. You're just going to get the flack if you're focusing on transitions, but that's what you got to do. So let's tie this whole thing up with this. How do you do this? Well, because we've laid the framework, you can do this poorly pretty easily. So how do you do this well? First piece of advice I have, if you're looking to add lights, sound, haze, background slides, whatever it is, find someone who knows what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Find someone because if you just
actually, honestly, truthfully knows what they're doing.
Yes. If you just go to sweetwater.com, you can start buying lights that look like they're going to work and they look like they're going to
do. Good friend of the show, Sweetwater.
Yeah,
and let me tell you, one of the reasons they're amazing is that they send candy with every order you make.
Which how can you not?
Why wouldn't you like that?
That's a whole other sign of marketing we could get into.
True.
But we just made some enhancements to our sanctuary, to our set, and I was thankful to have somebody who was actually a production lead at a big church for 12 to 15 years. Believe it or not, he had a lot of good things to say and a lot of good things that were like, I didn't even think about that, and things that I was going to do that he's like, oh no, you don't want to do that. And I see now why, you know? And so I'm thankful that he had that. And another reason why is, for example, there are certain products out there that will do the same thing. And there are certain things where you want to buy the expensive stuff, but there are certain times where it's like you can get better quality stuff for your space to do what you want to do for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
You know, so like know someone who knows when to skimp on the cheap stuff and when to like not and that kind of thing. So find someone who knows what they're doing. Another piece of advice I have here, and I've learned this one tenfold. Start small and incorporate slowly. Mm-hmm. If you just go and buy a DJ level haze machine, strobe system, laser, and lights, and just throw it up on a Sunday morning, your church is going to hate you. They're going to be like, what just happened? Like, don't throw all of this on at one time. Maybe you switch around some of the wash. Maybe you throw out some of the backlighting or uplighting it and change the colors, but start small.
I will say the one exception to that would be the sound system, because I think sometimes what you see is, you know, like it doesn't sound good, we have to replace our speakers. And then it still doesn't sound good. So now we need to replace our soundboard. And then it still doesn't sound good. So now we got to replace our amp. Like all these little things. And it's like...
And oh yeah, by the way, it's the same sound person doing it every time.
Right. First, step one is make sure that you're actually getting the most and best out of the current equipment you have before you just assume you need to replace things. But then, like, for a sound system, like, bring somebody in that does this professionally and get the whole thing taken care of. If you can do that financially. That would be my recommendation. Yep. Because all the sound stuff communicates with each other. Yep. And they're all working in concert together. If you get a system where all the pieces were picked intentionally to work together, it's going to be a lot better than like we have all of this random stuff and we're trying to make it all work together. It's like fitting a square peg in a round hole.
Yep. Yeah, and it's going to be a headache and an expensive one at that if you piece it together.
Yep.
Another thing, train well. Just because you who set it up and plumbed it in and have played with it during the week, just because you can run it and know how it should be run and when to run things, when not to run things, doesn't mean you can just say, hey, buddy, all you have to do is hit this button, it'll do. Like, that's not going to work. Like, you have to train them well. I love, Kyle, that you alluded to that, like, you were having a powwow with your team to help steward the moment. Because the thing that when it comes to training, you have to explain the why before the what. Just because your teenagers, volunteers know how to manipulate lights doesn't mean they know how or why they should. Mm-hmm. Just because they know how to make sure that wall is now green and that gobo is over there doesn't mean they understand that when Kyle's making a point and is closing things down, wrapping things up, and having a super somber, real moment, that you want a gobo going from the wall now to him. Yeah. That's distracting, right? Yep. Like, just because they know how to do that doesn't mean they should know why they should or should not do that. Mm-hmm. And so, but that's where we stop. Sometimes it's like, okay, do you know how to run this board? Yep, I got it. Awesome. Mm-hmm. And that's where we stop.
Or it's like, do you know what you're doing here? Like, yeah, I ran sound at my last church. Okay, cool. And we give them full reign. Do you realize how broad of a spectrum it is for someone to say, I ran sound at my last church? Yeah. Like, there are soundboards that you can get for $100 and there are soundboards you can get for $100,000. Yep. You don't have no idea where they're coming from. And it could be anywhere along that spectrum.
Which is scary.
It is absolutely scary. And so I would say, the other thing, and this is a hot button for me because I've seen it done very poorly, is I've seen tech training done where it's, I as the leader don't know how to do this. I'm going to give you, my volunteer, YouTube links to videos. You just go watch those and learn it yourself. And that does two things. One, it's just lazy and it communicates laziness. But the other thing that it does is there's not teamwork in that. What I love, and this is something, if you have a soundboard that can do this, this is going to be the greatest training you've ever heard of in your life. If you have a soundboard, and a lot of modern ones have this capability where you can access it remotely. You can log into a lot of them will connect with an app on your phone or a program on your computer where you can log into the soundboard remotely. Okay? Do it at like a rehearsal where the sound guy's at the board, they close their eyes, you're somewhere else on remotely, and you do something. You mute the guitar player, or you completely blast the gain on this one vocalist, the background vocalist. You mess with the board in some way, and then you say go, and they've got to try to figure out what happened and where the solution is. If you just hand them the keys, if you just give them a couple training videos, what they don't learn is problem solving. Mm-hmm. And problem solving is arguably the most important skill a tech person can have when running the equipment that you have, which again, maybe goes back to knowing where you guys are at. If you get all the big fancy equipment, but have nobody that understands how to run it and has the capacity to troubleshoot, then you're probably going to be in trouble, especially when something goes wrong.
And the other problem with that too, which is our last point, is just because they ran sound at a church that had 2 banjos and a ukulele doesn't mean they
$20 if that's your worship set on Sunday.
That would be amazing.
That'd be awesome.
That would be super awesome.
Little known fact, I have actually played a banjo for a worship set.
Does not surprise me. Just because it's you. If anybody else, that would surprise me. I don't know if I've
done ukulele. I have done banjo, though. It was really fun.
I need to see this.
It was in high school, so I don't know that there's video.
Well, you have to recreate it live.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But like my point is, just because you mixed that doesn't mean you can now come to this church with a digital soundboard, 2 electric guitars, a bass, a keys, 3 vocalists, and drums, and you can go, oh, I got this.
Yep.
Or you flip that around. You come from a church that runs 1,500 on a weekend, and it's boom, boom, it's loud, it's crazy, it's going just absolutely nuts. And now you're at a church that's got an acoustic set, and you're just blasting everybody's ears out. You have to, what this all boils down to is you need to find what fits your church, your culture, your vision, and ultimately, I sure hope you know what's going to be best for your church as the pastor. As the youth pastor, you know what your group can handle. So stretch it, do something new. But ultimately, if it takes away from your vision, take it out.
Yeah.
Take it out. Like, these are not meant to...
Put it in storage.
Yeah. I don't care how much you spent on it. Try and return it. Try and resell it. But no amount of work, no amount of expense is worth you compromising your vision for the sake of these enhancements. Mm-hmm. If they're doing that, they're being used wrong. Paul talks about not making anything in worship, be distracting. Mm-hmm. If these things are built to make your worship better, but they are distracting, that's an expensive distraction. Yeah, I get that, but it's a distraction no less. Mm-hmm. So you got to get rid of it. You know? And so these things are meant to enhance your atmosphere, not detract away from it. And if they are, they're not worth your time.
Yeah. And the last thing that I'll say is that from a broad perspective, looking at, ministry as a whole in our culture, I believe very strongly, and it's okay if this is just Kyle's personal belief, but I believe very strongly that the church is headed in a direction where less is more. Yeah. That the church is headed in a direction where all of the tech and the fancy lights and the haze and all of this stuff that can, produce some good things and enhance the atmosphere when done right. I feel like we are headed in a direction where, like, I don't even know that people want it.
Yeah.
I don't even know that kids, there's a lot of kids that could not care less about having all of that stuff, because at the end of the day, if you ask your youth students, if you ask your congregation, and this is I understand this is a slanted way to put it, but Would you rather have some backlighting in a haze machine or the presence of God?
Yeah.
Like, they would much rather have the presence of God.
Yeah.
And so, in your role, whether you're the youth pastor, the lead pastor, the worship leader, the tech person, the volunteer sound person, whatever it is, you know, and I know that the presence of God is so much more valuable to people than some of these things. And so put your effort there first. Put an extra 10 hours a week into your sermon instead of programming the lights. That's a lot of time to program lights. I hope you're not, but you get my point. Like, spend the extra time, developing students and diving into the word with your students, and less time doing some of these other things. If you can set it and forget it, that's a win. If you can automate some of these things, that's a win.
Yeah.
Your time is infinitely better used making disciples.
Yep. Yeah.
Because that's what we're called to do.
Drop the mic. I mean, I'll be the first to say it. We have these things, like we do have them and they are helpful, but it is one of those things like it can't substitute. It needs to be put in its proper place. And so I think ultimately this episode is not polarizing things, because you have people on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, we want to give, within our context of the podcast, we want to give youth pastors permission to use some of these things well. And we also want to give youth pastors permission to not use these things.
To not be burdened by
if not be burdened by them, not be confined by them. Like, if you use these things every single week, take one Wednesday and just get rid of it all. Just as a change of pace. If you don't use some of these things, but you have them, maybe use them once, just to kind of change the pace and have a different atmosphere. But doing it all within, I think we just keep coming back to this idea of doing it all within what God has called the culture and the vision for your ministry to be.
Yeah. Which is, that part alone, it could be a whole episode. Like,
accurate.
Because that's your job.
Yeah.
That is your job, is to know, as the shepherd of the sheep, what your sheep need, So I think we got to just leave it there, man, because I think we go on from there 2 hours. But
that is accurate.
The moral of the story is haze until you can't see the person next to you. Lasers that are red when possible.
Did you know that Sweetwater sells a bubble machine?
Oh. You know what? We're going to have to get some of these. Now that we have video.
Should we do that in my office?
Yeah.
Oh, this is a great idea that I cannot see going wrong at all.
We both have kids. We go to Walmart, each get a bulb machine for our kids, and then just test them out in here and see what it
it's
looks
only like $10 on their website. I don't see the problem with that. I'm obviously looking up the most expensive light that Sweetwater sells.
It's because
I do highly recommend Sweetwater. They make some really
their
great
customer
equipment.
Service is top notch.
And they give you candy. As a youth pastor, what more could you ask for? All right.
Money.
That does it for money. That's fair. To do all these things. That does it for today's episode. We appreciate you guys hanging out with us. On behalf of Derek, I'm going to go buy this $13,000 light from Sweetwater. Goodbye.